The story of the bow begins long before recorded history, when early humans first learned to harness the springy properties of wood for hunting and defense. Though we can't pinpoint the exact moment when this happened, many historians believe that the widespread use of bows dates back to the Mesolithic era. During this time, humans faced a hunting crisis. Large herds of game, like mammoths and aurochs, began to dwindle in numbers, pushing early hunters to adjust their methods. As bigger prey became scarce, people hunted smaller game, like birds and deer. In this shift, the bow debuted, offering a more efficient and practical tool for shooting smaller targets at a distance. Of course, humans aren't the ones to settle for basic tools. As our ancestors became more adept at using the bow, they refined and perfected it. Once a simple hunting tool, the bow evolved into a critical weapon used in warfare, paving the way for even greater innovations. As time passed, the bow became more than just a tool for survival. It evolved into an instrument of power and precision. In some cultures, this meant increasing the size of the bow itself to deliver greater force. Take the English longbow, for example. This towering weapon could be as long as 6 feet, providing the strength to pierce armor at long distances. Similarly, the Japanese yumi, an asymmetrical bow that could stand as tall as the archer, was used for both mounted archery and foot combat, offering a distinct advantage in battle. But increasing the size of the bow wasn't the only way to enhance its power. Nomadic cultures like the Mongols turned to a different approach: composite bows. These bows were made by combining wood, horn, and sinew. The result? A bow that was smaller, more portable, and more powerful than a simple wooden bow. Composite bows could be drawn with much greater force, making them ideal for mounted warriors who needed a lightweight weapon capable of delivering devastating power. While the bow underwent these refinements, another radical change was on the horizon. As early as antiquity, people began experimenting with ways to make the bow easier and more effective in battle. One of the boldest attempts was the creation of the crossbow. The crossbow simplified the firing process by merging the bow with a wooden stock. This allowed soldiers to aim and shoot much more quickly, even without extensive training. However, the trade-off was a reduced rate of fire and an increase in the weapon's size, making it bulkier and less nimble than traditional bows. The crossbow was intended to be the next step in the bow's evolution, but it quickly became something entirely new, a weapon with distinct advantages and disadvantages. Unlike the traditional bow, which required significant skill and strength to draw, the crossbow was easy to use with minimal training. This made it especially appealing to armies, where conscripted soldiers could quickly be armed with a powerful weapon without spending years training. One of the most common myths about crossbows is that they were much easier to learn than traditional bows. Many articles claim that it only took a couple of hours to train someone to shoot a crossbow, while archery required years of practice, often starting from childhood. While there's some truth to this, it's not as simple as it seems. Yes, a crossbow is easier to aim and shoot than a bow, but that doesn't mean it's guaranteed success after a few tries. Imagine handing a modern rifle to someone with no experience. Even though rifles are easier to aim, they still require training and practice to become a proficient shooter. The same goes for crossbows. While they are easier to handle than traditional bows, crossbowmen still needed a fair amount of skill to make effective shots. A crossbow bolt, for example, only flies relatively straight for a short distance, about 10 to 20 meters. After that, gravity starts pulling the bolt downward, losing speed. Crossbow bolts travel much slower than rifle bullets, making it essential for crossbowmen to practice their aim and adjust for distance. Furthermore, firing at moving targets added another layer of complexity. If you were shooting at an enemy on the move, you'd have to lead your shot, just like with a modern firearm. This required even more practice to master the adjustments for varying ranges and moving targets. Despite all the complexities of crossbow use, accuracy often took a backseat on the battlefield. The goal in battle wasn't to hit a specific target with pinpoint accuracy. It was to create a dense rain of bolts or arrows aimed at enemy formations. Archers and crossbowmen alike would fire in volleys, aiming roughly at the enemy, with the primary aim being to saturate the area with projectiles. This tactic created chaos and forced the enemy to take cover, making it harder for them to retaliate effectively. The crossbow's maximum range was achieved in field battles when fired at a 45-degree angle. This, of course, meant that accuracy was less important than the sheer volume of bolts being fired. The goal was not to hit individual soldiers, but to create a barrier of projectiles that would disrupt the enemy's lines and cause panic. In the past, hitting your target with a bow or crossbow was extremely important in battles, sieges, and even hunting. Accuracy was key whether you were trying to take down an enemy soldier or hunt for food. Archers and crossbowmen could change the outcome of a battle by hitting their targets from a distance, making this skill a matter of life or death. In a siege, for example, archers and crossbowmen could strike from far away, causing damage to enemy soldiers, or even breaking down walls and gates. In smaller battles or during hunting, it was still crucial to hit the target accurately. In all these situations, being able to shoot straight determined success. Learning to use a bow or crossbow properly was a skill that took time, but crossbowmen had it easier than archers. Crossbows, though powerful, were simpler to use because they didn't require as much skill or strength as bows. A crossbowman didn't need to learn as many complicated techniques as an archer. As long as they had the physical strength to pull the string back, they could aim and shoot with fewer problems. Archers, on the other hand, needed months of practice and had to be physically fit to shoot well. Their skill set required more time and effort to master. Elite marksmen, whether using a bow or crossbow, needed years of practice to become good. They didn't just pick up their weapon and become experts in a day or a week. It took consistent training and dedication. The crossbow was easier on the body than the traditional war bow. It used mechanisms like stirrups and levers to help draw the string, making it less physically demanding. This was one reason why crossbows became so popular. They allowed soldiers to conserve energy and focus more on aiming. In contrast, using a war bow was exhausting. Drawing the string of a large war bow required a lot of upper body strength, especially in the back, making it tiring to use for long periods. Crossbows didn't require as much physical strength with their built-in mechanical systems. A well-known myth about the crossbow is that the church banned it because it was so deadly. The church's Second Lateran Council of 1139 issued a crossbow ban, but it wasn't just because of their power. The decree called the crossbow hateful to God and banned its use. But this ban wasn't purely for moral reasons. At the time, knights were the ruling class and wore chainmail armor. The crossbow could pierce this armor, which made it a threat to the knights. Since knights were warriors and landowners, the church likely wanted to protect their power by limiting the weapons common people could use. The ban served the interests of the rich and powerful, not just to stop violence. Interestingly, the same council also banned knightly tournaments, declaring that the church couldn't bury anyone killed in these events. But even after this decree, crossbowmen and tournaments continued to grow in popularity, showing that the ban didn't have the desired effect. Knights were more than just warriors. They were powerful landowners in the feudal system. Since the crossbow could threaten their armor, the church's ban on the weapon helped keep knights in control. This gave them an advantage on the battlefield and in society, as it limited the weapons that common people could use. The crossbow's power challenged this system, and by limiting its use, the feudal elites could maintain their control over the population. The ban on crossbows was just one way they tried to protect their position. But despite this, the crossbow continued to be used and became more popular over time. Another misconception is that peasants could easily defeat knights with a crossbow. In reality, crossbows weren't cheap. A high-quality crossbow with composite or steel parts was expensive and not something the average peasant could afford. These weapons were typically used by city militias, mercenaries, or wealthier people, not by poor farmers. On the other hand, the English longbow was much cheaper and more accessible to peasants. Longbowmen were often recruited from rural areas, while crossbowmen in places like Genoa came from wealthier, urban populations. So even though crossbows were powerful, they weren't the go-to weapon for the average person. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 is often seen as an example of English longbowmen beating Genoese crossbowmen. The English archers were successful, but the situation wasn't that simple. The English had disrupted the French army and reigned just before the battle. Wet conditions made it harder for Genoese crossbowmen to reload their weapons, which gave the English a bit of an advantage. The Genoese soldiers also didn't have their usual shields, which would have protected them from arrows. While the English won the battle, the conditions made it much more complicated than just a simple contest between bows and crossbows. The use of a crossbow required special protective gear called a pavise. Pavises were large shields used by crossbowmen to protect themselves during battle. These shields were especially useful because crossbowmen often had to stay in one place while reloading, making them vulnerable to enemy fire. The pavis shield protected them, allowing them to continue shooting even under attack. In battles like the Battle of Coutances in 1346 and the Battle of Nájera in 1359, crossbowmen using pavises blocked English arrows, allowing them to continue fighting. English longbowmen were powerless against the pavis shield's protection in these cases. Crossbow technology improved over time, making it even more effective. Early crossbows used simple products made of wood or composite materials. However, by the 15th century, steel prods and mechanical cocking systems became common, making crossbows more powerful and easier to use. These advances helped the crossbow remain an important weapon on the battlefield, even as firearms were beginning to emerge. The ability to pull back the string with greater force and accuracy made crossbows a reliable choice for soldiers. Longbowmen are often regarded as some of history's most skilled and deadly archers. Their main advantage? Rate of fire. While a crossbowman might take a few seconds to reload, a skilled longbowman could fire up to 12 arrows a minute. This rapid-fire capability gave them a distinct edge, especially in open-field battles where the sheer volume of arrows could overwhelm the enemy. The longbow required years of practice, but its speed made it a game-changer on the battlefield, allowing archers to create a relentless rain of arrows on enemy forces. A common myth is that crossbow bolts were made entirely of solid metal. However, there's no real evidence to support this. Crossbow bolts were mostly wood, with metal tips for extra strength. Some bolts even had special designs, like reverse-tapered shafts, to make them less likely to get stuck in shields. There's a misconception that crossbows are far stronger and more effective than longbows. While crossbows did have slightly better range and penetration, they weren't 3 times more powerful than longbows, as some believe. The power of a weapon depends on many factors, like the draw length and the bow's strength. So, while crossbows were powerful, they didn't massively outperform a good longbow. The performance of both longbows and crossbows depended on how they were built. For example, a longer draw How far back the string is pulled gives an arrow or bolt more power. Heavier crossbow limbs could provide more force, but lost speed because of the recoil. Crossbows didn't perform much better overall than a good longbow. Heavy crossbows with huge draw weights were designed for breaking through castle walls, not for fighting on the battlefield. These big crossbows weighed around 7 to 8 kilograms, making them slow to reload. A longbowman, in comparison, could shoot much faster. So, while heavy crossbows were good for sieges, they weren't practical for fast-moving battles. People often think that crossbow bolts could pierce plate armor, but that's not true. Even with very powerful crossbows, bolts struggled to penetrate thick plate armor. However, the armor quality varied, and weaker armor could still be pierced. Plate armor wasn't perfect, but offered much protection, especially in the joints or gaps. In the 15th century, crossbows started using steel parts instead of traditional materials like wood and sinew. This wasn't because steel was necessarily better, but because it was easier to mass produce. Making metal parts was faster and cheaper than creating composite parts, which involved layering different materials. Steel prods allowed armies to equip more soldiers with crossbows. While crossbows might seem like they were always ready to use, leaving them cocked for long periods wasn't good for them. The tension from being cocked for too long could damage the parts, especially in cold weather. Steel prods could even break when exposed to the cold. Crossbows were also heavier and slower to reload than longbows, making them less practical in fast-paced combat. Both crossbows and longbows had their pros and cons. Longbows were fast and allowed rapid firing, making them great for quick battles. They were also easier to learn and didn't require as much strength. On the other hand, crossbows had more power and were better for breaking through strong defenses, like castle walls or armor. However, they were slower to reload and bulkier, making them less effective in a fast-moving battle. Ultimately, neither weapon was better than the other in every situation. Longbows were better for quick, open-field battles, while crossbows were more useful for sieges or taking down heavily armored foes. Each had its time and place, and both played important historical roles. What are your thoughts on these medieval weapons? Please let us know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.